morning, everybody, and welcome to the webinar Digital Disruption in the New Normal. I am Srividya Mahadevan, an alumna of IIM Udaipur from the class of 2016. Today, we have two panelists with us, Professor Kaushik Ghatak and Professor Srinivas Pingali. Professor Kaushik Ghatak is a visiting faculty at IIM Udaipur and founder and director of Value Quest Private Limited. He has over 22 years of technology and business transformation related leadership experience with Asia Pacific and United States. He is recognized for career achievements related to strategic planning, business value selling, and guiding teams of top talented contributors. He had career stints with leading companies such as SAP, Oracle, PwC Consulting, and IBM. He has also consulted with clients such as Fuji Xerox, Canon, Foxconn, Huawei, Motorola, and Suzuki. Thank you for joining us today, Professor.
Thank you, Srividya, and thank you everyone for taking the time. That's a long introduction. In very short, I like the digital technology space and I like talking about it. So thank you for inviting me.
Thank you. Our second panelist, Professor Srinivas Pingali, is a faculty at IIM Udaipur. He has 28 years of varied experience in product development and innovation, sales and marketing, market research and business operation in multinationals such as Tata Group and Accenture, and entrepreneurial companies such as Quattro Global Services. His research interests include digital transformation, small and medium enterprises, and omni-channel strategies. He has multiple articles, papers, and also a couple of books published. Welcome, Professor Srinivas.
Thank you, Srividya, and good morning, everyone.
Before we begin, I would like you to know that towards the end, we'll be taking questions. You can post your questions in the Q&A portal. So starting with the topic, digital disruption in the new normal. Most of us have seen this transition happen. We used to go to a grocery store to buy grocery. Today, it happens in our app. Well, I might sound old, but we went to Udaipur to attend classes. And now classes are all in Zoom. You can attend from your house. It's been over 100 days that I visited my office premises. We are all working from home. Digital disruption seems extremely important in this new normal. So, Professor, we would like to know your thoughts on this. We can start with you, Professor Kaushik.
Yeah, sure. Disruptions as a word was not new for us, right? Much before COVID, we have been talking about disruptions and the changing face of business, changing face of technology. But I think what the new normal, we're talking about the new normal here. So let me draw reference to the post-COVID world that we'll see. We're going to see some changes that will be different in terms of the nature of it and impact of it than the pre-COVID world. So let me explain how. During this massive disruption hit us, right? Nobody was prepared for it. Nobody could ever plan for it. And it has really affected our lives, our economies, in ways much more than one, right? But certain things have happened. While we were cooped up in our homes, our consumer preferences and consumption habits have slightly changed, and we have focused more on essentials rather than non-essentials. So hopefully that, as things become more normal, the spending in terms of the non-essentials will go up. But what will not change are the habits that we have acquired in terms of digitally consuming and ordering things, right? So, as psychologists say, if you practice something for 21 days, that becomes a habit for you. I think what we have done it in many cycles of 21 days. So the fact is that in the future, we will consume services, products and services more digitally than we were used to before. So I'll stop here and maybe Professor Srinivas, you could add some of your thoughts.
Sure, completely agree, Professor Kaushik. So as you said, digital is not new. It's been around for at least 5-6 years in its current avatar. Obviously, there have been previous avatars of that as well. So it has been around for the last 5-6 years, but in some sense, it was very elitist. Some of the large companies hired big consultants and they were going through it. everybody else was talking about it, and there was discussion saying, yeah, it's meant for the big guys, it's not meant for the small guys. So there was a lot of everybody was aware of what it can do, but I think adoption was fairly slow over the last 5-6 years. Some of the hype around digital was far higher than reality, and that's the truth. And I think what the current crisis did is that that hype is turning into reality very, very rapidly. And I think both Srividya and Professor Kaushik have given some great examples of how this transformation has been accelerated. I guess the question in everybody's mind is that, is this permanent, or once things get back to normal, and hopefully they'll get back to normal sooner than later, will we go back to the way we were? And actually, this is part of some research that I'm currently doing. And I think clearly, as Professor Kaushik said, consumer mindset has changed. And I asked this question to a mid-sized retailer in the city of Hyderabad, saying, hey, today you're doing everything through WhatsApp business and you're delivering at home. What's going to happen? Will you go back? And he said, even if I want to go back, I will not go. I cannot go back because my customers have got used to this convenience. So I think the COVID crisis has done a few things. One is that it has accelerated the transformation. Second is it has made the transformation more permanent. And the third, the most important aspect in my mind is that the transformation has become more democratic. It's not restricted to the few large companies who are spending a lot of money doing it. And everybody found their own niche way of transforming.
Very true.
Thank you, Professor. So I think a lot of us understand something when we say digitalization, but I would like to know from you guys that what it really means and how is it different from digitization?
So Professor Srinivas, I'll let you go first. I know this is a very, very dear topic of your heart. And then I'll add some flavors, adding some additional colors. Please.
There's this thing that Watson, right? But I think it is important to kind of differentiate. So digitization, in my view, is automation, right? It's very straightforward. Something was being done manually and then you automated it. So if you take a process, let's say accounts payable, earlier invoices were coming as paper processes, and now they're being scanned and they're running through workflows and stuff. So that is digitization. And digitization has been around for a long time, at least 20, 25 years. A lot of outsourcing was enabled by digitization and vice versa. And I think it's important to differentiate digitization with digitalization, which is also called digital transformation. The two are in some sense synonyms. Digital transformation is not about just doing technology. Technology is, in my view, digital transformation is about making strategic changes changing the way your business model works. And technology may be an enabler. And going back to the example that Srividya mentioned, right? I mean, retail, yeah, maybe he was doing accounting manually and then he implemented Tally, and that is digitization in my view. But today the business model has changed. So they're building apps where customers are ordering on an app, or they're being delivered. So the entire business model has changed. Yes, it has been enabled by technology. So in my view, that's the difference between digitization and digitalization, and it's an important difference.
Yeah, absolutely, I agree. And I'll give an example of a project I have been shared with at one point of time. I live in Singapore, and the Singapore main taxi operator is Comfort Delgro. So way back, about 15 years back, we have helped them get through a transaction ERP platform, and then a CRM platform, and also a kind of a vendor platform to get on board the taxi drivers, etc., etc. So in effect, we digitized their business. And that is very different from when Uber, and here in this region Grab, when they came in with a digitalized business, where they took the power of the digitized information to link customers and suppliers together and created a completely new business model. And that is, so a company which remains digitized but does not get digitalized, if I can play on that semantics, will not succeed. And that's a very, very important point. The other way I'd like to differentiate is, in many ways, digitization is giving you efficiencies. It's giving you efficiencies in terms of automation. It gives you efficiencies in terms of reducing human errors, data accuracies, and so on and so forth, right? Whereas digitalization is giving you effectiveness. It is allowing you to, play in your markets better with a more powerful competitive strategy, creating new revenue models, creating new business models, so on and so forth. So someone who is thinking of just digitization in the post-COVID world, the post-COVID world is not for them.
If I can add to that, Professor Kaushik, I think you made a very important point that digitization is a prerequisite for digitalization. You can't digitalize unless you digitize.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
it is a prerequisite. And in fact, right now, a lot of companies are scrambling around even to digitize because that's the only way they'll be able to get to the next phase.
Yeah, true. And, this is also a very favorite topic of mine. So I'll give you one more example. A digitalization also would, so Uber, I gave an example, which is a new company, right? So they don't have the baggage of the old world, right? Let me give you an example of a company, a success and a failure, who were old companies, but they have either successfully digitalized or not. So one classic example is Tetra Pak. Tetra Pak, as you might know, the packaging technology was invented somewhere around 1970s, and then the inventor himself started off the company. And for the Tetra Pak packaging to work, you need very specialized equipment that you also have to buy from Tetra Pak. So the companies who are buying these equipment will have to, so they have to buy the full equipment, which has to be running full time, et cetera, and then they'll package it in fruit juices and all that, so on and so forth, right? So what Tetra Pak did, starting with initiatives since 2009, 2010, is slowly they moved towards digitalization in a way where they have completely, through sensor technology, they have connected all of their manufacturing facilities with their equipments, as well as they have the ability now to bring in their equipments which are in their customers' facilities to get their operating parameters. So basically now Tetra Pak is going into a outcome-based service level agreement model and ensuring 99.99% uptime of machines and charging based on that. And you see, that requires a completely different mindset, because all of these B2B manufacturers earlier would sell equipment, they'll get the equipment cost, and then they'll have an annual maintenance contract, a very box selling mentality. Whereas now you have to be completely engaged with the customer, and that needs change in KPIs, that needs changes in organizational structure, skills. So digitalization for Tetra, an example like this, is very different from digitization. The failure story here is GE, which started off exactly with those same intentions, created their Predix data platform, but could not digitalize to the extent that they needed to, given the investment that they did, because GE has such baggage of old world that it was very difficult to change mindsets.
I think taking a cue from that, so we spoke about Uber, which is a new company into this, and they started off as a digital platform. But at the same time, there are companies which have been in this business for quite some time, and they now have to digitalize their approach. So how should they go about planning and thinking about this transformation?
Maybe I can start off.
Sure.
Dr. Kaushik can add. So that's true, Srividya. I guess there are two kinds of companies, right? One are called native digital or born digital, which are companies that started off digital, like an Uber or a Airbnb and so on. And then they are the traditional companies who have to go through a journey to get to that. So there is clearly a difference. And one of the drivers for these traditional companies to go down the path is that they're facing the heat from the born digital, because the born digitals don't have a legacy. There is no right or wrong answer. The only thing I can say is that it's not going to happen overnight. It's a fairly long process. The way companies are going about it, I think there are one or two key steps. One is to actually sit down with somebody who understands this and kind of draw out a roadmap of what is required, to take a look at their existing operations and saying, this is what I'm doing. What is my vision for on digital transformation in the next whatever 5 to 6 years. These days, anything beyond that, they're obsolete and useless. So I think the first is to draw that map, and then start prioritizing what needs to get done first and what needs to get done second. And that brings about another interesting concept that is being talked about quite a bit these days in terms of two-speed IT, right? So you can't transform an organization overnight. It's a fairly long process, especially large companies. So where do you start? Now, typically, a lot of companies say, I'd rather start with the customer because the customer is what matters. So they kind of transform the front end. They put in portals and web apps and mobile apps and do all of that. But doing the back end at the same time is difficult. So they're actually running what is called a two-speed IT system, where the front end is at the speed of light and digital. The back end is the old traditional back end. And there's some kind of band-aids that are holding things together. So I think this is slightly dangerous, but that's the only way to start, because otherwise, if you wait for the entire organization to get transformed, by the time you transform, digital transformation itself will transform. So you can't wait.
Yeah. No, I completely agree. And one of the things I think, Professor Srinivas, you touched upon it. It is extremely important to put the horse before the cart rather than the cart before the horse. And let me explain what I mean by that. So the horse is your strategy, your business, where you want to go. And that should be very clearly articulated. And your digital strategy and your transformation strategy has to be aligned to that business strategy. Just because digitalization is the flavor of the day and everybody is talking about digitalization doesn't mean that you take technology, and that's the cart, putting the cart before the horse. You take the technology before and then plan your business strategy later on. So that alignment with business strategy and then alignment between functions and trading partners is extremely important. And as you start looking at the need for these alignments and need for meeting your strategic objectives, you'd find that there are gaps that you would have. As Professor Srinivas said, some may have invested a lot on the customer side. Some may have invested a lot on the upstream, supply chain and supplier side. So given where we want to go, where are the gaps? And based on where we want to go, what are those priority areas of interventions in which business functions? Maybe all I need to do at this point of time is put my planning engine together, because my execution platforms are really good, but they don't know what to do. They know how to do it, but they don't know what to do. So maybe that's where we need to focus. And that is why, keeping that consistency of thought in terms of where we are going in terms of business, where does digitization and digitalization come in, where are the gaps, and what my transformation roadmap is. And also the roadmap prioritization is not only the wish list where we want to go, right, but also the feasibility. Do we have resources? Do we have funds? Do we have skills? So all of those need to come in terms of, as you design your roadmaps.
So when we think about the entire value stream, as you mentioned, it might be at the customer side as well as at the supply chain side. So when a company is thinking about it, from which angle should they start thinking? Would it be the entire process at once, or would it be like, okay, first let's get to the customers, give them a digital platform, and in the meanwhile, work on our operations and make that also digital?
Yeah, so my view is you need to think through the entirety. You may do bits and pieces, but you need to think through the entirety. And on the customer side also, not all customers are equal. You don't need to put the same customer strategies for everyone. So for some customers, you need to be responsive because they give value to that responsiveness in terms of higher prices. But for that, you need to have that part of the supply chain and upstream responsive. Whereas there are certain customers who are discounters and they don't give, they don't care much about those value-added services. And for them, you cannot afford to have a very responsive upstream to take out the efficiencies. So it is, you cannot eat the elephant in one go. You have to take, go it at bites.
Absolutely.
And
Sure, sir. Go ahead.
I also think that, it also depends on what business you're in. Typically, what I'm finding is that B2B companies are focusing more on digitalizing the backend because, a lot of business to business, a lot of it is about efficiencies and throughput and so on. And B2C companies tend to focus on the front end. Again, it's a generalization, but that's broadly what I'm seeing in the research that I'm doing.
Yeah.
I think that's a great point. Yeah. Also, from a technology point of view, what kind of technologies will be needed for this? And also, we see technology changing every 4 years. So, how can a system be built to adapt to this as well?
Yeah. So let me take a stab at it first, and so what kind of technologies? And again, the kind of technologies would depend on what you're trying to achieve, right? Maybe let's take an example of a B2C company, a retail company, which wants to get their downstream right in terms of giving them a unique customer experience. And that unique customer experience would need interventions in physical stores maybe, and also online stores, right? So you are then talking about technologies that give that unique customer experience in terms of better navigation, better user experience, and application of AI in stores, and so on and so forth, right? All those cool new technologies that we are seeing in physical retail store now. So, but maybe maybe another company, they have got their, and let me take a B2B company, and maybe a B2B company who needs to be much more customer responsive now and gets into a much more value-added service model, what we call servitization in many ways, where we are not just selling products, but we are selling services based on those products. They need a really strong visibility on their overall, not only interactions with, understanding of what's happening at their customers, shop floors and, at their facilities, but also, in terms of the entire upstream that is supporting that customer experience, right? And maybe for them, the way to go is something like a strong IoT platform, and other strong analytics based on that. So it again depends on what you're trying to achieve, and hence technology. Yep.
So just to add to that, I guess in terms of technology, everybody knows there's 5 or 6 technologies that are being talked about, which is IoT, AI, blockchain, VR, AR, analytic platform. So these are the 5 or 6 things that everybody is talking about. But I think the important thing here is, again, as Professor Kaushik said, don't lead with technology. You first need to figure out what you want to do, and then sometimes maybe it's an old technology that will work, that will fit the situation. So I think one of the challenges today is to not get carried away with the hype of some of these new technologies as well. And they have their strengths, but do we really need to invest in something which is untested, or would you rather go with something that's tested? I think that I would suggest to exercise caution on that front before jumping into. In some cases, it's good because it kind of puts you at the front end, but I think that caution needs to be there in terms of putting in some of these technologies. The other thing I'm seeing is, and I was recently talking to one of the largest pharma companies in India, and completely, yeah, and technically pharma is B2C, but for all practical purposes, they are B2B, right? So at least in the Indian context. So I was talking to them saying, I asked them exactly the question you asked me, Srividya, in terms of saying, so how are you going to look at this? I mean, things are changing so rapidly. By the time you implement, I mean, there are multiples of billions of dollars. So I said, by the time you implement, it's going to be obsolete. The answer I got is that, we are not going to look at it technology by technology. We're going to actually look at converting ourselves from a classic manufacturing company to a platform company. So they're looking at it very differently. They're not looking at, do I need blockchain or do I need IoT? They're saying, how do I convert myself to a platform? So I said, pharma company and a platform, what exactly does that mean? And it was quite interesting to hear. Again, I'm not at liberty to share a lot of what was told, but it's very interesting that the way they're looking at life is very different from, they're not even looking at it within the existing paradigms. They're actually trying to say that 10 years from now, my multi-billion-dollar Indian pharma company will be a platform with a whole bunch of users and a whole bunch of sellers, and I will be in between. So, and my biggest strength is not chemicals or manufacturing, but data. So, very different thought processes that are coming in some of these corporate boardrooms on the way they're looking at future. So, it's not just about implementing 5 or 6 technologies and going ahead.
No, and it's very interesting you mentioned about the platform. Just this morning, I was having a chat with a friend of mine, and he's in core banking, so nothing to do with supply chains, and nothing to do with B2C and etc. etc. B2C, of course, but banking. And what he was mentioning was the whole banking service providing model in terms of if you bring in in the same context of a manufacturer and a distributor and a customer, even banking industry has it, right? There are banks which manufactures these products in terms of deposit products, loan products, and so on and so forth. And then there are distributors who will distribute, right? So what he's seeing is that that manufacturer and distributor model is getting more and more challenged. The existing model is getting more and more challenged with the help of technology. So that, over time, probably the number of manufacturers will reduce and the number of distributors will increase. And also the manufacturers, the size of these manufacturers will be much lesser, because now smaller manufacturers can come in with very niche product and put it on a platform which then gets distributed to the consumers. So, and also this is the other piece I wanted to mention about this is one thing that new normal will hopefully do for us is better risk management. And the examples that we are just taking is also related to that risk management, that we are not taking asset risks, but we are leveraging on a platform to make money collectively and enough margins so that everyone can have. The risk management piece also brings me to another point around technology. I think what will happen, hopefully, if we don't forget the lessons that this particular disruption taught us, is that you see, only banking and insurance, and to some extent telecom, are very highly regulated industries. And therefore, risk management, and Srividya, you come from the financial services side, so you would definitely relate to it. So from a compliance and regulation point of view, their risk management processes are extremely robust. They do shock simulations, they do scenarios, and so on and so forth. Unfortunately, the other industries, the broad set of other industries, for them, a risk management is either a yearly exercise to put in the annual report in terms of a risk assessment, but in terms of having ability to plan scenarios very quickly and take actions, that ability is very low. So I think one investment that is called for, and some of the leaders will get into, is having a more robust risk management platform that is integrated with their planning and execution system that lets them look at different scenarios and alternatives based on frequency and impact.
So taking a cue from that, risk has been something, so whenever you think about going to a new technology or digitalization, risk has been a paramount thing, because if it doesn't work, if there is any security issue, then specifically in the banking and financial sector, as you mentioned, it could lead to a lot of problems. So what would be some of these risks that one must consider while the digital transformation process?
Yeah, Professor Srinivas.
Yeah. No, so it is. I mean, one of the biggest reasons why digital was not adopted as rapidly as people thought it was that it's untested, right? And especially in traditional and highly regulated industries, that is a big challenge. So there is no there is again no one answer on how to manage risk. But I think, as Professor Kaushik said, the important thing is to recognize that there are risks, and like in any implementation or whatever the implementation is, you need to have risk mitigation strategies. So, it could be that isolate your digital transformation to a sub-segment, test it out, make sure it works before you roll it out. So fairly commonsensical things. I don't think it's anything very dramatic in that sense. The problem with a lot of digital transformation is that there is no one else who has done it in your industry. So there are very few learnings available, unlike say traditional technologies. So there is risk involved. The thing is, how do you kind of isolate the risk? Maybe launch something for a particular market or a particular geography or a particular segment, test it out, and then scale from there. The other challenge, the other big risk, one is of course, in terms of customer acceptance and all of that. The other risk that I'm seeing, especially with the smaller companies in India, is that they are being misled by people who don't know much more than them. That's a big challenge right now, where people want to do digital, but they really don't know how to go about it. And they're being advised by people who don't know either. So it's blind leading blind, and I think that's the other thing. So the other thing I would suggest, at least when it comes to risk management, is make sure you have the right partners, somebody who has experience of doing this in the scale that you want it to be done, because it's all new, and you're not going to have all the expertise internally. And you need to make sure there's the right partner. So again, I'll use the example of this large pharma company that I spoke about earlier. And I asked the same question, saying, how, so they do have one lead system integrator, if I might call it, which is one of the big 3 global consulting companies and all of that. But despite that, they have 40 other vendors. And I said, do all of these guys come under the large SI? And they said, no, we are actually talking to them directly, because we want to make sure that we are aware of everything that's going on in the industry ourselves, and so that we take a very knowledgeable decision. So that's the other thing. There's so much happening right now in terms of digital. You need to be aware of all the options that are available, and what will become the standard of the future. Because the last thing you want is to go and implement something which is later not the standard in the industry.
No, great points, great points. And, I'd like to kind of put a framework around some things that Professor Srinivas, mentioned and what I see. So you see, in order to manage the risk of technology implementation, we have to manage the technology life cycle well, right? So what is the technology life cycle? Technology life cycle starts with the identification of the need for technology, which is the business case. Why do I need it, right? And then evaluating and choosing the right technology, right? So together, collectively, I call this building the right things. So I need to be building the right things. Yeah. So that's the first piece of it. If my technology strategy, my digital strategy is aligned with business strategy, and if I have chosen, if I've evaluated through a really good set of criteria, I'm kind of, eliminating my chances of risk in terms of having at least deciding on building the right things. The second piece is building them right, because I may have got all of these technologies, but as Professor Srinivas mentioned, if I don't have the right technology implementation partner, if I don't have the right skills within, and if I have not, brought that momentum of, this change properly, then we will not be building them right. And there'll be a risk there. Okay, let's assume that we have also built them right. Then comes the biggest issue, I think, is in terms of adopting. So take the example of GE, right? They built the right things that would have, Jeff Immels's vision was very strong, and they built the right things. They probably built them right also, because Predix platform was a partnership between GE, Intel, and Cisco. All the right players to make that platform ready. But they could not change their mindsets. They did not communicate that change, the need for change and the elements and the impact of that change to every stakeholder. Probably. And again, I'm assuming, I don't, have either empirical or nor direct evidence from there. But the fact is, Predix platform, they're probably writing it off. So they probably did not, manage the change process, which gets me to my biggest, point on managing technology risks. I have been in many technology implementations over the last, several decades. And one thing that I have noticed as a pattern is that technology implementations succeed because of people, and technology implementations fail because of people. So there are many other risk elements, data accuracy, skills, and so on and so forth, fundings and right implementation partner. But if the people are not with you, it is surely going to fail.
So
Absolutely.
I just add a few more things. As Professor Kaushik said, obviously change management is a big thing in any transformation. It's not just digital. But one of the things that I guess, it's come back into fashion now, I wouldn't say it's new, is this whole concept of design thinking, right? Get the customer in right up front.
Yeah.
Because the last thing you want to do is go down a path of doing something new and not getting acceptance from a customer, whether it's a B2B customer or a B2C customer. So that's why I think design thinking has come back in fashion. It was not called design thinking when I did it 25 years ago, but I think now it's a new name, but it's the same thing. The other thing that I hear a lot from people who are going down the digital path is customer trust. And that's a pretty interesting concept. It's something I hadn't thought about till I heard it 4 or 5 times, and I said, "Oh, there is something to this." And I'll give you a few examples. Recently, I was talking to this agri-chemical company. They're one of the largest agri-chemical distributors in the country, and the way they sell the product is they actually have these field sales guys who go and talk to the farmers, and each relationship person has a relationship with 40 farmers. They speak the local language. They live in the same area. They've been there for many, many years and all of that. And suddenly he's having to go digital. And he said, will the digital media actually give me the same level of customer trust that I had through this face-to-face interaction? And but on the other hand, I asked him saying, then after COVID, go back to the way you were doing things. And he said, no, I won't, because in the earlier days, my relationship person would be 40 farmers at best. Today, I do one of my relationship person does a video call. There 200 farmers join. He says, I can't get that productivity if I go back to the way I did. So, how do you balance this enhanced productivity, but get the same level of trust that you had with face-to-face? And I can go on about this for hours, but that's an interesting thing that's come up in some recent discussions.
No, extremely interesting. And the only thing that, as you were mentioning, the other piece, in terms of managing risk, also along with design thinking and understanding the customer and customer trust, I think the other piece that has really helped and is really helping is the whole agile development life cycles. I started on my implementation journeys in late 90s. And those days, if you do a big project, it's typically 1.5 years to 2 years long. By the time, even in those days where the business world was changing not that fast, by the time you get to the user acceptance testing, a lot of your assumptions around initial solution design are all dated. So then what do you do? There's a big challenge in terms of managing scope, managing budgets, and et cetera, right? And then there is a strong push. You're trying to push this solution in, and the users are reacting, and that is creating conflict. With agile development, what's happening is you're quickly testing it out. And that is a huge contributor towards managing risks of technology implementations.
Absolutely. Also, I think it's a great investment. It's a huge amount of investment that people do in technology for digitalization. Having said that, how can the benefits be measured?
Yeah, so you have to measure the benefits. Let me mention how. So you see, I'll mention about why you have to measure the benefits, and then secondly, I'll talk about how. So you see, understanding the benefit of a technology, transformation is part of the business case. Unless you can articulate the benefits in terms of business value or the changes in our, how it impacts our job, benefits from those perspectives. If we cannot articulate that in terms of, in the context of each stakeholder, A, you don't have a goalpost to shoot at. B, you do not get people motivated enough. So key to successful technology implementation is to get that goalpost in mind where you want to go in terms of your top line, bottom line impact, some of the strategic benefits, some of the financial ratios that will get impacted because of this technology, the return on assets, equity, so on and so forth. Now, how do you do that? And we practice this as a methodology, very structured methodology, and I teach this methodology at IIM Udaipur also, and some other universities. So you see, in order to achieve a strategy, you need to do things in your business functions, right? For example, to acquire new customers in a new area, in a new product area, you need to do things in your design side, in your sales side, in your marketing side, in your channel distribution side, and so on and so forth. And if you do well in those business processes, then there is a good chance that you are actually getting to that strategy. And you can measure how well you should be doing in each of those business processes. So the KPIs that are relevant for those business processes, right? So if you don't have to estimate, you don't have to be perfect in terms of that estimate, right? You have to be directionally correct. That I am investing in technology platform to help in these business functions so that I can reach these strategic objectives. So if my technology investment is right, I've chosen the right ones and I've built them right, then I should get such KPI improvements in my business process. And there you have a quantified goal. So, and then you bring in the gut feels and you have a strong business case. So actually I've taken, in Oracle SAP, we used to do this as a regular, part of our engagement process, where we would understand the business strategies of customers and help them develop business cases based on all of these considerations.
Yeah, I think it's also important to know how we can measure it so that the leadership can be convinced to get into some of these technologies.
Absolutely right. Absolutely right. And there are, there are benchmarks available. So there are benchmarks of similar journeys that others have done, right? And you can, use those benchmarks. And a lot of time, I have got into, discussions with CFOs where the CFOs are saying, oh, you're saying that this actually gives, 15%, improvement. But, that's a global thing. There are a lot of companies that are in the US. I'm in Indonesia, and, this will not happen for me. And then my point to them always is that you don't have to take 15%. Take 5%. But are we agreed that there is an improvement there? As long as we have agreed that there is a directional improvement, let's put a stake on the ground and see how we can measure it. And then monitor as we have implemented the technology to see if we are getting there or not.
Absolutely. So your point of view, Srinivas, on how can we measure the benefits?
Yeah, again, I think there are two kinds of, there's the ROI calculation, and one of the questions I ask a lot of the companies who are going through digital transformation is, how do you look at ROI? I mean, and I think a couple of things. For point solutions, I've generally heard that they're looking at a 12-month, 14-month kind of an ROI. But when it comes to overall corporate digital transformation, I think it's virtually impossible to put a number there, because that's going to be a fairly long process. It will take 3 years, 4 years. So as Professor Kaushik said, it's better to take it in small parts and think, what do I get for doing this? And some of it could be a financial ROI, some of it could be in terms of customer satisfaction. So you have to use a range of parameters to look at it, and not purely from a financial metrics perspective.
Yep.
Because the moment you start looking at everything from a financial metrics perspective, you may not be incentivized to go on that path.
No, absolutely. And one of the biggest benefit drivers that we used to have for the financial guys, in the old ERP days, is that ERP and financial planning is that, look, if you are doing this implementation, that means that soon after month end, those 7 days, you can actually go home at 5 o'clock. You don't have to stay till 10 o'clock. And that's a huge motivator, believe me.
True.
Okay, as an MBA graduate, what are the kind of skill sets that employers are looking at for digital transformation?
I'll take a shot at it first, and
Maybe I can start off in Professor.
yeah, please go ahead. Yeah.
No, that's fine.
So, what are employers looking at? I think at one level, so again, depending on, are you an engineering student, are you a, humanities student, or you're doing an MBA, the skill expectations, etc., will be different. So one thing that employers are definitely looking at are people who will be able to implement this technology, right? So from that perspective, strong STEM skills. The whole good analytics and good STEM skills are something that they are definitely looking at. From a other piece that employers are now, I'll take it off from a technology implementation perspective, but as a business manager perspective, something that the MBA or MBA students will become. I think the biggest thing that employers are looking at is nothing to do with technology. It is the critical thinking skills. Because as we move forward, those days are gone where we will get structured problem to solve. Most of the time, we don't even know what we don't know. So connecting those dots, thinking through, and coming up with an alternate set of solutions, that thinking skills will be extremely, extremely important. And any student who demonstrates that, I think, has a leg up in any discussions. And I think coming specifically about MBA students, where I see a gap today in terms of skills, and I'm sure the employers see that too, is that as technology disruptions happen more and more, and new technologies become flavors of the month, we are getting more siloed into two communities. One is the geek community of technologists who are thrilled with the TLAs, the 2 or 3 letter acronyms, DX, CX, and UI and UX, and all of those acronyms, and they're very good at it, and they get into the technology architecture, and they are thrilled with the technology. The other community is that of business, who are the developing strategies, who are running operations, and who are motivated by the financials, by the impact the business is making. More and more, I see these two communities moving apart, because as technology disruptions and as new technologies come in, this silo is getting much more specialized for someone who doesn't have insights in the technology to relate to. And that's very risky, because that whole tenet of taking down the risk of digital transformations and aligning your digital strategy with business rests upon the fact that there are people who understand, who can link business and technology together. And I think that is the slot, niche where MBA students fit in really well. They need to understand technology, not the depths of it, but they need to understand how it helps business. And they need to understand business as, in terms of, and I hopefully that's their learning anyway.
I couldn't agree more. I think you articulated it very well. So at a very base layer, I think all MBA students need to understand the technology. They don't need to get into the depth, but they should at least understand the applicable. I mean, in what kind of a scenario would you implement blockchain? What kind of a scenario is IoT there? You don't need to know how to implement blockchain, but you should know what these technologies are. You should know what an Ethereum network is. You should know what IoT is, the terms, and also that when the technology person talks to you, because technology people love to talk with a lot of jargon, as Professor Kaushik said, and you have to understand what they're saying, right? They're so much in love with their technology, and of course that's good. I'm not saying that in a bad way, but they want to experiment with the latest thing because it's new and that's what it is, and all of that. But I think where MBAs come in is bringing sanity to the entire process, saying yes, I understand that part. I know enough about it, but I'm the person who's going to bring sanity to this. And to bring sanity to this whole thing is, as Professor Kaushik said, is where all those other skills come in, right? And again, specifically, if you look at the one-year DEM program, it has been designed with this in mind. So you have courses like design thinking, you have courses like storytelling. A lot of times people ask me saying, why is storytelling a course? But it's very important because it's,
Very well.
I mean, that's a very important thing for an MBA is to take all of this and put it into some kind of a story which takes things forward. It's about interpreting and expressing and communicating that. So the other question a lot of times I'm asked is saying, you guys come, professors come and teach strategy and all of that, but that when I join a company, that's all CEO level work. I'm given something very different on a day-to-day basis. So, how is this actually helping me? And and my answer to that is that, yeah, don't you want to be CEO one day? Don't you want to? Yeah, of course I want to. Then if you want to, you should know what the overall direction is. Digital transformation, like any big transformation, obviously is a CXO level, board level kind of a thing. But if you really want to contribute to that, you need to understand the way they are thinking. And that's the reason why a lot of what we teach in the business courses, even though that may not be something that you're doing on day one, it's important for you to understand. And the good thing about digital, and I use the word democratized in a different context earlier in this conversation, but I think it has also democratized innovation in a company. Traditionally, innovation was part of a product development team or part of a CXO team, but there's so much going on in digital, anybody can come up with an innovation. So use some of the knowledge that you gain in an MBA kind of a program. You may not be able to use all of it to transform a company, but transform your own area, and that could be a start. So I think skills, I agree with Professor Karthik, but in terms of the way you're using it, I think there are lots of other ways to use it, even though you may not be transforming a company from day one.
Yeah, I'll just add one more point on the skill piece. Just triggered off a thought after hearing Professor Srinivas. This whole digitalization world has for too long been dominated by left-brained persons. We need infusion of a lot of right-brain skills to build that empathy of the customer journey, empathy of how people will use it, and humanize the technology more. That's the only way. And I think MBA programs can do a lot towards in terms of contributing to that.
Absolutely. I think that's very informative, and we have been through some of that in our daily work as well. In the interest of time, we'll start taking questions. We'll try and take a couple of questions. The first one is from Iftikhar Ahmed. While earlier any disruptions arise due to necessity or an opportunity, in this case, the disruption is a forced one. Consumers and producers both have been forced to change. Does a forced change have the same sustainability as a natural gradual change?
Yeah, so I'm happy to take this. I wrote about this recently. So
yeah, please.
So Iftikhar, please go see the article I wrote. I think it got published in the Hindu Business Line, and which is exactly what you mentioned, and it's a great question. So I think it will sustain. If you look at most transformation that has happened over the last 100 years, it was all forced change. What academics lovingly called exogenous shocks. And let's look at what happened in terms of payments in India, right? It was whole demonetization. I mean, digitalization of payments was being spoken about for a long time, but the day you demonetize, everybody switched to that, and hardly any of us are going back to the old ways of doing things. And another great example is the entire Y2K that happened, right? I mean, Y2K happened and companies were forced. They didn't have people to handle it in the US, and therefore they had to offshore to lower cost locations like India. And that's the reason why an Infosys is what it is today, or an Wipro is what it is today. And 20 years later, the Indian IT companies dominate the world. So that's a very clear sign of a discontinuous change that caused an industry shift. So I personally believe that in fact, I actually say that the change is normally sealed by these kinds of crises. It's not the other way around.
Thank you, Professor. So there has been request for sharing some of the research work. So it would be great if you can share it with the group.
Sure.
We'll just take one more question. All right. So here we have a question from Bhargav. He's the automation COE for Dr. Reddy's. And his question is, now with the need of the hour and being in essential services, how do you think working environments and plants will change? We are using Bluetooth beacon functionality for ensuring employee safety and health. Any cheaper and efficient solutions available to enable digitalization of factories?
Professor
Well,
Kaushik,
yeah, I will. I'm not aware of the the specific solutions that may be there, but and again, so probably if you can add anything else, Professor Srinivas, that would be helpful. But what I think is, given this whole situation we have ended ourselves in, and given the fact that we are not going to, this is not going to go away over the next 6 months, maybe a year or so. I think more and more the focus on safety and health in the workplace will be extremely important. And there are two pieces that will happen also, I think, is there'll be a continued emphasis on having people work from home who can work from home. And for those who have to be there, there'll be enhanced safety and security measures. So again, that calls for a whole case of digitization in terms of touchless recording of data, touchless interactions, and so on and so forth. What specific technologies? Unfortunately, I don't know what exists out there. So, Professor Srinivas, anything you want to add on there?
Again, Bhargav, I guess it's a very company and industry specific question. So, like Professor Kaushik, I may not be able to give examples, very specific solutions. But one way to look at it is that, and I've actually been doing some work on this, is that if you take most industries, right, in terms of automation and digitization, India is way behind. Right? If you look at a plant in Europe or a plant in the US, they've already automated and digitized a lot of it and digitalized far more than what we have done here. And the reason for that is very straightforward. We have abundance of labor, and at some point it doesn't make sense to over digitize, because if you have the labor and the ROI is much better, then why even invest in those kinds of technology? So one thing I would suggest is go and benchmark with your own plants. I'm sure Dr. Reddy's has plants globally that you have, or other pharma companies that operate outside in a European or US context. And that will kind of give you a laundry list of all the automation that is possible. So that's one way to look at it in terms of where to get the ideas from. Then there is a big social angle to this as well, which is the scary part of it. And if I can digress for a moment, Sridhar, and this is, Bhargav, the question you're asking, everybody is asking, saying, a lot of companies in India work with migrant labor and migrant within India. For example, Dr. Reddy's plant in, say, Telangana, a lot of the labor would be from neighboring states. They won't be here. And, with everything that's happening with migrant labor, and they've gone back. So companies are seriously asking themselves, saying that, is this really a short-term problem, or is this a longer-term problem where the labor won't come back? Do I want to get myself into a situation like this again? And that brings up some very interesting social questions. One is, yes, from a corporate perspective, you need to automate because you've held off that automation for a long time. But now, because of the crisis, you're forced to go down that path, and your boards are asking, saying, hey, we really need to push this. We don't want to be in this situation again. So that's one angle. The other angle is what happens to this labor once things are fine. I mean, where are they going to come back to? Their jobs are gone by then because it's been automated. So I think there's a big social angle to this. Not that I have a solution, but I think that's the next crisis that we're going to have in terms of how to handle where are the jobs for migrant labor if everybody automates.
Yeah,
That's true. All right, in the interest of time, we'll have to stop here, but there are a lot of more questions in the panel. So for the unanswered questions, we'll share the responses later with the participants. Thank you so much for your time, professors. This has been really informative and a very interesting topic as well. If you have any other queries, participants can send their queries to media@imu.ac.in. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Srividya. Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.